Hello and welcome to my final project. My name is Jessica Weinmiller and my project is on gender stereotypes and how they hurt us all. This presentation is broken down into four main categories. What does gender stereotype mean? How is stereotype created? Why is gender stereotyping bad for everyone involved? And how can we fix this problem? So first off, I want to define what gender stereotype means so that everyone can be on the same page going through the presentation. Gender stereotype is defined as personal beliefs about gender differences in traits and behavior, largely attributable to socialization. It also means standardized representations of men and women within a culture, particularly in the mass media, with differences between the sexes, notably in their physical appearance, traits, behaviors, and occupations. Throughout this course, we also learned of the term gender construction. It's important to note that gender construction and gender stereotype are two very different terms. Gender construction is defined as the process of creating the gender differences that exist in a society. So it's because of this gender construction that we find stereotypes of genders different from society to society or from culture to culture. It all depends upon what the people in that certain area believe and what roles they believe that certain genders should hold in their society. So now that we know what gender stereotype means and what gender construction means, let's look at how the stereotype is created. While I was going through and doing the research for this presentation, I was inspired to draw this little cartoon of a man and a woman and just kind of really show different things that you hear every day. And these are things that I've heard said to myself, that have been said to my friends, I've heard firsthand said to other people. And it's just really interesting because it's not just men saying it to women and women saying it to men. It's also women saying it to other women and men saying it to other men. And I feel like people take it more seriously and more to heart when a woman says it to a man or you say it to the opposite gender. Either way. But it's crazy to think about the impact this can have when you're saying it to the same gender as well. When women aren't supporting other women, when men aren't supporting other men in a productive and healthy way for society, it takes a toll on people. So if you're told on a daily basis things like, you're such a girly girl, let me do that for you, or you're a little girl, you're weak, or you sure can handle that, you're a slut. It's okay to let a man touch you. You're here to please them. And if a guy is like into something more feminine by societal standards, such as dance, people often say like, dance? What, are you serious? Like, are you gay? You call them like twinkle toes. People say, don't be a little bitch, suck it up. Dude, why are you crying? Are you gay? You're too weak. I just found it really interesting that when a girl is stereotyped or talked down upon, it's always about how slutty she is or how promiscuous she is. And when a guy is stereotyped or talked down on, especially when they show more quote unquote feminine qualities, it's always associated with being gay. And those two things are ultimately the individual's choice. Like, if you want to be flirty, that doesn't mean that you're a slut. Or if you have a more feminine quality, maybe you are gay, maybe you aren't gay, and what's wrong with being gay? What's, you know, I just think it's interesting how that also kind of crosses over into the whole LGBTQ spectrum of stereotyping people. So, when the term gender first came about, it was really created for the purpose of telling apart the sex of the individual. It wasn't created to stereotype and categorize people. While doing my research, I listened to this TED Talk by a woman named Rita Chinchankar, and she brought up the whole idea of a stereotype threat, a fear of proving a stereotype about yourself correctly. And she was talking about how humans are so affected by what others think of them, and that this threat plays off of stereotypes. The whole idea was that if you're a woman and you look at all the other women out there and you see them being stereotyped and being categorized in these certain roles, whether it's like a stay-at-home mom or in a professional role like a nurse or a nanny or something like that, then you kind of think that you have to mold yourself to fit into those stereotypes. Because if you don't, then people in the society will really judge you. And it plays off of that fear that you have of judgment. So it was just really interesting to listen to that aspect of her TED Talk, because I hadn't thought about stereotyping in that way before, where essentially you're stereotyping yourself. And this leads into gender imbalances in careers where you see less women in high business societies and a larger number of women being things like nurses or care providers or stay-at-home moms, whatever it may be. It plays into that and creates a reality for that stereotype. She also talks about how gender roles have been around since hunter-gatherers and before then. But she noted that the gender roles were based on anatomy, and in our modern society, we don't need to have those gender roles. So back in the Stone Age, or hunter-gatherers, way back in time, prehistoric, men would do the hunting because women were carrying the children and they would do the gathering. That was based off of anatomy, not based off of what the individuals were capable of. And now that we live in a modern society, we don't need any of that, really. We can go to the grocery store to get our food. It doesn't take a certain person of particular gender or sex to be a business person. Anybody can do it. So the point was that our modern society makes this prehistoric notion of gender roles completely irrelevant, and it's actually a hindrance on our society. Very often when gender stereotype is talked about, it's talked about as the woman being the victim and somehow men benefiting from the stereotyping. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. It does. However, on the flip side of the issue, men also suffer from stereotyping. And although it's more prominent for women statistically when it comes to career choices, the effect that it has on men isn't necessarily seen on the surface. Sometimes it's mental. So one thing that I've mentioned before is a male ballerina. So in reality, what it takes to be a ballerina is extreme athletic abilities. And usually men in ballet are very masculine in appearance. But for some reason, our society makes fun of male ballerinas. Why is that? Here's a picture of an actual male ballerina. You can see he's very muscular, he's very athletic, he's confident, he's proud of himself, he's on top of his game. But then you see how society portrays a male ballerina, and they're making fun of it, and it's a costume and it's a joke. Why is that? So the whole point here is that both men and women, and as I'll discuss later, people who identify as non-binary, are all negatively affected by gender stereotype and gender construction. So let's explore more of why this is so bad. Now we're coming to the point where we're hitting on our third bullet point. Why is gender stereotyping bad for everyone involved? So on the slide, I have a bunch of pictures and cartoons and advertisements that show how stereotyping negatively affects everyone involved, really. I mean, if you take a second, just look at some of these pictures. You see things like the ad on the top left saying, "You mean a woman can open it?" On the top right, there's the whole stereotyping things that little boys are taught that boys should fix things, and little girls are taught to be submissive and that they need things to be fixed for them, that they can't do it themselves. In the middle on the top, girls these days are sexualized at a young age. If you just take a second and look at this, it's really crazy. And we can remember seeing these advertisements and these cartoons on a daily basis. You see this all the time. It's really interesting how much you're told, maybe not even verbally, that you are part of a stereotype. So as I mentioned before, women suffer tremendously because of gender stereotyping, and it's not always talked about how men are negatively impacted by gender construction within their societies. But it is a problem for both men and women, and even for those who are non-binary. Then why does our society continue to practice this stereotyping? It's just a rhetorical question, but one to really think about. Does anybody really have the answer for this? There's an actor, his name is Justin Baldoni, and he's played on different shows, TV shows, movies, and he's most famous for his role in Jane the Virgin as Raphael. Well, he did a TED Talk on stereotypes, especially from a man's point of view. And I never really thought about stereotyping from a man's point of view before I watched his TED Talk. And it was really interesting to me, and I wanted to include it on this because I feel like this is half of the problem. So he was talking about that if a man shows feminine qualities, that they're often bullied. Just as I was talking about with ballerina. He talked about these stereotypes and this gender construction as being wrong and toxic. And he made a call to action for people to end it, which is very important. But this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been around in various societies all around the world throughout all of human history. So one example is the ancient samurai warriors. If they were in a situation where they either died or surrendered, those were their two options, they would literally stab themselves in the stomach and would show no emotion. And that would prove that they were real men, that they didn't surrender, that they would rather die and die honorably, aka showing no emotion. Which is, I mean, to our modern society, maybe a bit ridiculous. I just thought that was really interesting and thought I'd put it in there. Also, in African cultures, in some of them, not all of them, there's this coming of age ritual where they would circumcise the males who were young men at the time, and they wouldn't use any pain relievers. And when they were done, they would pour an acidic mixture of fruit and onion on the wound, and the men were expected to show no signs of pain. And if they did, it was seen as being weak, and their prospects of having a decent marriage and their social status would be ruined, and they would also bring immense shame to their families. So we look at this and we're thinking, wow, this is crazy. These are very extreme examples. However, when you really look at what they're saying, we're saying the same thing to men in our society. Maybe we're not doing it so physically, but it is mentally being said to them, the same exact message that is being said to the samurai warriors and to the African tribesmen. That message is, if you are not man enough, then you're a disappointment to our society. And being man enough means no crying, no feminine qualities. You show emotion, that's bad. You're strong, you're supposed to support people, you're leaders, and as in the little cartoon on the top right, you're supposed to fix things. Just think of the immense pressure that this has on men within our society. We all know about the pressure that this has on women and the negative side effects that stereotyping has on women, but I never thought about it from this other perspective, which is why I wanted to feature this in this presentation. It's incredible the amount of mental pressure, the amount of mental stress that is put on men in our society, and that is why suicide rates for males is 2 times higher than it is for women. And the whole idea of what it means to be masculine, that stereotype, that social construction, is where much of this problem comes from. So now that we talked about how men are stereotyped and how that negatively affects them, let's talk about women. So women are also negatively affected by gender construction and gender stereotyping, as we all know, some of us firsthand, like myself and like many of my friends. So businesses are usually run by white men, which is leaving many capable people who should be given the chance to run companies and get equal pay a chance to do the work, to run the companies and to get the equal pay. This also includes stereotyping on people of color, not just women, both male and female. So this covers quite a broad range of stereotyping and discrimination. But in this context, it is important to note that especially women are discriminated against in the workforce. And people are passionate about things like equal pay, which I had mentioned, because it brings a lot of these wrongdoings and these stereotypes into light. So I know a lot of people get sick of hearing about equal pay. Well, it's a big issue and it needs to be talked about, and that's part of how we fix these problems, by talking about it, which I'll get to later in the presentation. It's also important to know that women are subjected to more sexual abuse than men because of the gender stereotypes that are placed on both men and women. So women are taught to be submissive and sexualize themselves because that's what they're supposed to do, and that's how they get into certain jobs, or they have certain careers, or they get opportunities that men just get, and not because of anything else other than being a man. And sometimes women have to overly sexualize themselves to get attention and to get those positions. But this plays into that whole stereotype that women are sluts, and it puts you in a position to be sexually abused quite easily. I feel like a lot of women are stuck between a rock and a hard spot. How do you get ahead in life, in your career, without putting yourself in a position to be abused? And when women are abused, they tend to question themselves to see if they're actually violated, if they're actually assaulted, or if they in a way brought it upon themselves or did it to themselves in a sense because they put themselves out there in a quote-unquote slutty way and that they were just asking for it. And this kind of goes back to the little cartoon that I drew a couple slides back, that the little characters were questioning themselves. Like, did I really bring this upon myself? Did I really do this? Am I really a slut? Did I make these people touch me inappropriately? And it's unfortunate that so many women go through this, and I can tell you firsthand, it sucks and you do question yourself, but it's important to know that you did not bring this upon yourself and that it's not your fault. In a way, it's the responsibility of society as a whole to keep both people safe, both genders, all genders, to keep people safe. So just some statistics here. This is looking at Europe, the European cultures. It's 3% of the top 50 businesses in Europe are run by women. So that is a very, very small fraction of the businesses are being run by women. And only 1.5 women out of every 10 men are on the top boards of companies. Hopefully we'll see this change in the near future, but it is just interesting to look at statistics. It always is. So there were a couple of quotes that I came across in my research that really hit home and I thought were important to include. One is written up here. It says that nature doesn't draw the line for us between male and female, that we actually draw that line on nature. This quote is from Alice Dreger. It was part of an article that I read and used some information from. It's just really interesting to kind of meditate on this quote and just know that we place a lot of these shortcomings on ourselves sometimes. The other quote I came across was part of Justin Baldoni's TED Talk, and it's a quote from Abdul Baha. And he said, "The world of humanity is possessed of two wings, the male and the female. So long as these two wings are not equivalent in strength, the bird will not fly." Now, obviously, there are more genders than just male and female that he doesn't take into account here. However, the basic meaning of this quote is the same, that everybody has to be equal in order for our society to run at its full potential. And I just thought that was interesting, so I wanted to include those two. Okay, so to wrap up here, our last bullet point is, how do we fix this problem? What can we do? We have all of these issues, and it's very overwhelming to find a solution. So here are some steps, some 3 simplified, albeit steps, to go about changing this gender construction that we have in our society. So the first objective is to change your mindset. And you have to view men and women and all non-binary people as individuals, as equals, as people. And you must teach your children from a young age. I came across several different articles about how to fix the problem of gender stereotyping, and they all focused on teaching children from a young age to treat others as their equals. because it's harder for people to change once they have a certain mindset, once they've been believing a certain stereotype for years. It's harder to change society. It's easier to mold young people to be inclusive, and specifically because we were all taught to have these stereotypes. We didn't have these stereotypes from birth. So the second step is to question the things around you. So if you see an inequality, or if you feel that you're being discriminated against, you really have to stop and question people. Like, why did you give me this certain job? Why did you say that to me? Is there a reason? Is that one of my characteristics, or is that a stereotype? And the third step is to change your own action. You can't expect others to change if you yourself still hold those stereotypes and still stereotype other people. So you do things that you want to do, and not just things that society tells you to do. You don't let those stereotypes determine who and what you're going to be. The key here is to challenge the norms of society, and without changing your own actions and challenging the actions of others, there is no way that society will change. And it's important to let it be known that stereotyping and gender construction is honestly a ridiculous notion. It's important to voice those opinions. And it might seem to oversimplify that there's this 3-step process to kind of tearing apart this whole gender construction notion. However, sometimes when there's this big of a problem and it's so widespread across quite literally the entire world, sometimes you need just a simple, easy process to get you started, some guidelines, some rules, and that is what those 3 steps gives you, really. And like I said, the most important thing is to teach children and younger generations that they're all equal to each other. So once again, go over these steps, 3 steps to change your mindset, question things around you, and change your actions. So with that, we come to the conclusion of my final presentation, and I just want to leave everyone with this little saying. The fact is that each of us are different, unique individuals, and that we are perfect the way that we are. There is no need to stereotype people or to tell people who and what they should be. So yeah, thank you for listening to my final presentation on stereotyping and how it hurts us all. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me by posting in the comments on this discussion thread or through email. And I appreciate you putting up with any noises that my dog might have made or the children in the background. So yeah, thank you for putting up with that.